Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to your Friday edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio, part of your SB Nation family of podcasts. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. And on this Friday, your New York Giants open rookie minicamp. And also, we now know the schedule for 2022. But mostly, we're going to talk about minicamp. We're going to talk about the state of the Giants as things the off season gets into full swing with minicamps and OTAs and all of that. And here to help me break things down is Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants and Giants Country. Patty, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ed. We're going to hit the field. We're going to see some more football. I'm excited.
Yeah, you and me both. It's not exactly real football. We'll see 2 days of hour and 15-minute practices, but we'll begin to get an idea of what these guys look like on the field, which rookies look like they belong, which ones look like they have that deer in the headlights look. Uh, that for me is always one of the interesting things. Is sometimes you can pretty quickly tell which guys are going to transition, fairly quickly to the NFL.
Yeah, and not only that, but we're going to get a little bit more of a look as to how this coaching staff is going to go about teaching, rotating guys, what kind of drills we saw some of this during the 1 day of access that we had last month as part of the voluntary minicamp, the extra voluntary minicamp, but we're going to get a little bit more of a taste of that. And then in the ensuing days and weeks, when we see the OTAs and then the mandatory minicamp, we're going to get a better feel for how this staff goes about doing things, and more importantly, what the depth chart, even though I know Brian Dable doesn't like to use depth chart, he likes to use rep chart, but we'll get an idea of, who's going to be getting the bulk of the reps, so to speak.
Yeah, I think you learn a few things sometimes, and I think with a new coaching staff, I think you're right. One of the interesting things is going to be just what they look like on the field, how practice is structured, how they go about their business, whether we see any difference in the drills or anything like that than we've seen over the past couple of years. So that's always interesting. But I'm curious, Patty, out of the various draft picks, I mean, is there anyone you're really looking forward to watching, for a couple days?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously you got to start with the two number one picks because they're probably going to go up against each other. So that should be kind of fun to watch. That being Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal. So they're going to probably square off against each other. But I want to see, I've said for a while now that to me the most interesting part outside of day one's draft picks is right around in the middle. So that group of Bellinger, the tight end who was chosen with the first of the fourth round picks, Belton, the second fourth round pick, and Micah McFadden, the first of the fifth round picks. That to me is an interesting cluster of players, and I'm particularly interested to see how those guys do.
Yeah, it is interesting, Patty, because when you look at this roster and when you look at the way that Joe Shane drafted, you hate to have to draft for need. And yet, and I don't necessarily think, I always tell people you can't say, well, you have to draft a tight end in this spot and you have to draft a wide receiver in this spot. But it was fairly obvious that the Giants had positions that at some point in the draft they had to address. And these guys, Bellinger, Wandale Robinson in the third round, Belton, McFadden, maybe even, Beavers in the sixth round. These guys, because of the state of the Giants roster, these guys could find their way to the field pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, they weren't just brought in here to ride the pine. They're going to contribute in some way, shape, and form if they are healthy, that is. We got to put that pre-qualifier in there. But yeah, this is a roster that prior to Joe Shane getting his hands on it, it had a lot of holes. It still has a few holes. There are still some things that need to be done. They need to figure out, what they're going to do at cornerback now that James Bradbury is an ex-Giant. They probably will want to add another safety, I would think, somewhere along the line. You know, so there are definitely things they need to do, but the roster in much better shape than it was when Shane came in here and inherited it.
That is true, Patty, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the roster is in great shape.
Right.
Now, the schedule is out. We know who the Giants are going to play and when they're going to play them. And before the schedule came out on Thursday morning, I was reading a piece from Mark Hale in the New York Post and saying that doesn't matter what the schedule is, the Giants are going to be the worst team in football in 2022. Now, I don't believe that. I don't want to believe that, but I can't sit here and tell you that the Giants are going to be a really good team in 2022, that they're going to be a playoff team. Just as you look at it right now, Patty, how do you see this team and how do you see 2022?
All right, disclaimer. I didn't read the article. I saw it, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet. And, look, realistically speaking, none of us know how seasons are going to turn out. If we knew what the future held for us, I think we would avoid a lot of problems. But that said, we have to apply, I think, a degree of, common sense and logic here. This is a new football team, in essence. All right, new coaching staff, new players, new concepts. Everything's going to be a lot different than it was last year. We saw it, I hate to say it, but we've seen it enough times with this Giants team when they have changed over coaching staffs, how initially they start off a little on the slow side because they're still thinking as opposed to functioning on autopilot. I don't expect that to change this year. Now, there are also some question marks regarding, what's still to come, which is why I don't like to get too far into the future to predict stuff. But, if I had told you when Ben McAdoo, for example, was the head coach that he would waste some of the training camp practices, would you have believed me? If I had told you that last year Joe Judge would go soft on some of the guys with injuries, would you have believed me? So we still don't know yet how Brian Dable is going to run training camp. And I think until we get a better feel for how that's going to go, that could better, I think, put us in a position to say, okay, maybe this team has a chance to start out quickly, or no, I'm not feeling it. They're still got a lot of work to do. They're still in preseason mode, and it's just not going to be as a positive a year as it can be. Now, that also said, I am not anticipating playoffs this year for the reasons that I mentioned. New team, new coaching staff. I know a lot of people say, well, look at the Bengals, look at the 49ers a few years ago. They went from worst to first. Yeah, they had established coaching staffs and systems in place. So they just had to really get guys back from injured lists and just get up and running. The Giants, they've got a new system in place. So I think there's still another year away from being a playoff contender. That said, I do think they're going to be a little bit better than what we saw last year.
For John Mara's sake, Patty, I certainly hope so.
I know. Well,
But
he's got to be patient. He has to be patient. You can't keep turning over the coaching staff every 2 years.
no,
At some point, you've got to just say, all right, you're my man, roll with it. Now, I get it. There were circumstances in the other three instances where they had to do it, but you can't keep doing this.
no, you can't, Patty. And the problem from a fan perspective is that this has felt like a rebuild ever since Jerry Reese got fired, Dave Gettleman got hired, and things, and the Giants, had that 4-year period where things didn't go well at all. But realistically, you kind of have to just wipe those 4 years out of your memory banks, because realistically, this is not year 5 of a rebuild. This is year 1. This is season 1. This is the first off season of a brand new general manager, of a brand new head coach and coaching staff. They are starting from the ground up here. This really, Joe Schoen has said he would love to compete in 2022. He would love to, make this as good as he can. That doesn't mean he can make it great. That doesn't mean because he signed John Feliciano that John Feliciano's automatically better than Billy Price, or that Mark Glowinski's automatically better than Will Hernandez. But really, it's about beginning to build a foundation toward 2023 and towards something better. So that's the way I look at 2022 is, can we find signs? Is Kayvon Thibodeau going to be an impact player? Is the off, do the Giants have tackles who can give them, building blocks? Do they show signs of going forward? So is that the way you're looking at 2022 as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I use this comparison a lot, and I'll say it again. I look at it as it's a new franchise. And so Dable and Shane brought down players that, Dable has worked with before, that Kafka has worked with before. And I look at them almost as corporate trainers. Like you ever go to a restaurant that just opened up a new location and they have corporate trainers that are there teaching the staff how to do the job and how to, deliver the customer service they need to. It's kind of the same thing with this football team. They have John Feliciano, who you mentioned, who has played in Dable's system before. He's going to be like a coach on the field. Davis Webb, the quarterback, who knows that system inside and out. I mean, shoot, they were going to make Davis Webb a coach, from what I understand, before he came down and joined Dable. So they brought down trainers to kind of get these guys who aren't familiar with Dable's system, with Kafka's system that he's incorporating, and they are going to teach them. So it's going to be a year of learning, but at the same time, you want to see the progress. You want to see them get better. It's like anything else. You start with a new instrument, you're not going to know how to play it when you first pick it up. But hopefully, within 6 months to a year's time, you're going to be able to play, chords and melodies and all kinds of stuff.
Well, what we saw last year, Patty, unfortunately, in Joe Judge's first year, I think we were optimistic. We were looking for those signs. We thought Joe had a plan. We thought he knew where he wanted to go and how he wanted to get there. And as things unfolded in year two, we continued to see, dysfunction. We continued to see overly conservative play. I think that what you want to see is building blocks. You want to see less dysfunction. You want to see that these guys are beginning to understand what they're doing, and that there's less of that sort of, what the heck is going on here when you look at this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to see progress, and ideally linear progress is what you want to see. Now, are you going to have some hiccups along the way? Absolutely. Every team has it. But you don't want to have a situation where one week it's 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. You don't want that. You want to see forward progress with this team, and you want to see a team that by week 17, or actually by week 18, since we got to account for the bye, is much better than what we saw in week 1. And, there's going to be adjustments that need to be made because things do pop up, injuries happen, life gets in the way, as they say. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to walk off the field and know that the team's headed in the right direction. And, Joe Judge, you mentioned him. I think he did have a plan, but I think, unfortunately, and you and I have discussed this before on your show, he just was so stuck within a certain plan. He never experienced failure. He never experienced, he had a certain way of doing things, and he surrounded himself with people he knew. Whereas Dable has taken a little bit of a different approach. He's brought in coaching staff members that he hasn't worked with before, but whose work he's familiar with. So you're getting a wide variety of voices and opinions and approaches. And if something happens, instead of saying, "Oh my God, how do we handle this?" Because let's face it, the Belichick and Saban trees, I don't think they've ever experienced disappointment. Maybe Belichick did way back in the day with Cleveland, and Saban, I think, with Miami. But these are coaches that have had both the highs and the lows, and I think that's going to be a big determining factor for the Giants as they hit these hiccups.
And it's interesting, Patty. We're through the major part of the roster building season, and we've seen, Joe Shane didn't have much cap space. He went out and he did what he could with a lot of, 1 year minimum contracts, veteran salary benefit contracts. A lot of the guys that he brought in, I mean, realistically, are stopgap guys. They're not part of the long-term future. They're guys that can get them through 2022 and maybe 2023 as they build the roster underneath those guys. But there are still holes on this roster, big time holes. You mentioned a couple of them earlier, cornerback and safety, and the release of James Bradbury, something that had to be done, realistically was always going to happen because of the cap situation if the Giants weren't able to trade him. People say, well, now who's going to play cornerback? And I think people need to understand there isn't going to be a big signing. There still isn't money to spend. Most of the money the Giants have will go toward their rookies at this point. So it's either going to be another veteran minimum contract, or the Giants are going to have to make do with what they have. There just aren't big moves they can make right now.
Yeah, they really don't have a lot of money, and they're going to have roughly, I want to say about, what do they have, 16 million now? So they need
They
about
oh,
12.6.
over
They're
the
going to,
cap, said this morning that they have roughly 14 and a half, and they need
okay,
12.6
so they're going
to
to have
sign
less than 3
rookies.
million.
They're going to have less than 3 million, and you can't operate
You
with less than
can't,
3
no.
million.
What they're going to have to do is they're going to have to redo some contracts that they currently. I mean, Leonard Williams. I don't know how Leonard Williams hasn't had his contract redone at this point, but that's coming. I firmly believe that's got to be coming.
It has
Uh,
to.
yeah, I mean, you exactly. So, look, it's unfortunate. The Giants last year, they took a huge gamble with their approach, a surprising one. I've talked about this before. They've tried to build a competing team through free agency twice before they did last year. And both times it didn't really work out. I mean, yeah, maybe you can make a case that, oh, well, they made it to the playoffs in 2016, but they weren't able to sustain it. And for them to go back and do it a third time just absolutely blew my mind.
Well,
And
it reeked of desperation.
it really did, because what that tells me is you're not drafting well. That's where, when a team has to rely that heavily on free agency, you are not drafting well. And one thing, the game might change from year to year, but one thing that doesn't change is the way to build a solid football team is through the draft. And then you use free agency to supplement as need be. The Giants have kind of done it the opposite way, and it has cost them year after year after year. And, look at the offensive line. Last year, can you honestly say that the Giants had any offensive linemen in the pipeline that you could say, oh, that guy's a future starter? I mean, anybody that was healthy, obviously. No, you
No.
can't. Now you can, because Shane added to that, but you couldn't last year. And when Dave Gettleman last year and Joe Judge were saying, well, we're fine with the offensive line we have, I was like, really?
Yeah, they just didn't have anything in the pipeline, as you said, Patty. And last thing really that I think I want to talk about as we discuss the state of the Giants is Jerry Reese used to say nobody bats 1,000 in personnel.
Right.
Dave Gettleman basically said the same thing. And Jerry made mistakes. Gettleman made mistakes. Joe Shane is going to make mistakes. He
Sure.
just drafted 11 players. They're not all going to be good NFL players. He brought in a bunch of free agents. They're not all going to make the roster. That's just how it is. You don't make every decision correctly. But I'm just curious if, because of the approach that Joe has taken this offseason, which seems to recognize to me where the Giants are and that this isn't a quick fix, that you feel better. And we always want to give these guys the benefit of the doubt at the beginning, but do you feel better at least about the plan or the direction at this point, than you have in a while?
I think so. And the reason why I say that is I, f- I can't put my finger on it exactly, but I just feel like the scouting direction that Joe Shane and assistant general manager Brandon Brown gave to the scouts was a little bit more comprehensive. I think back to something Brandon Brown said on an interview with Giants.com, and that is, you don't know where you're going to find talent. You got to look under all corners of the earth, basically. And it's true. I mean, look, they picked up the young man who Osi Umenyiora helped develop in his program, The Uprise. They picked up guys that head scratchers to us, like Wandale Robinson. Everybody's like, what the heck did they see in him? Or what did they see in, these two North Carolina offensive linemen who came from a unit that wasn't really very good in college, but they really did their homework. And I can't put my finger on it, but I just get the impression that Shane and Dable are truly working arm in arm here. We always say that, excuse me, the general manager needs to work with the head coach. He needs to listen to what the head coach wants, what the head coach needs. You and I have talked about this before. We used to say that Jerry Reese and Tom Coughlin, we didn't think they were on the same page all the time.
Right.
There were times I wondered, towards the end especially, were Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge on the same page? Was it a matter of Joe Judge saying, I want this guy and I don't care if this guy isn't as good as the guy you want, So,
yeah, I if I can say this quickly, Patty,
sure.
I just thought that John Mara used to insist that he loved the way that those two guys worked together. And I think that when you look back on it, I think John was painting a picture that he wanted us to have that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah, I agree. Now, so far, I think Dable and Shane are working hand in hand, which is what you need. That's how this team is going to get better. You can't have the coach wanting something and then the GM wanting something else, and then the GM saying, well, I'm the boss and I'm going to do what I want. It doesn't work that way. And I think the fact that these two men are working together and they have the same, vision, if you will, that's a good thing. And the fact that they're being thorough in terms of looking for talent, whether it be in the CFL, the USFL, wherever, that's also a plus. And I can't wait to see how Shane continues to make over the scouting department, because he's already started, as you know. And we'll see. A lot of people were concerned about that going in, but Shane does have a plan, and it seems to align with what Dable wants to do.
Yes, it does, Patty. And Patty, thank you as always for the time today. I want you, let folks know what you've got going on.
Yeah, so Locked On Giants is going to be, it's every day, Monday through Friday, but this weekend with the mini camp coming up, we're going to have an extra show on probably Saturday or Sunday, I'm not sure. I'm also going to be hosting another Twitter Spaces. I've hosted my first one last week. It was really successful, so we'll do another one of those. Giants Country will have the reports. I've got some stuff coming up on that. I've got, schedule analysis and some other, inside analysis that I'm trying to put together for you. And then ultimately, we're going to start counting down to training camp with a look at the players on the roster and who we think's going to make it, who we don't think's going to make it, and what roles they might play.
All of that, Patty, and you're still finding time to mess with your hair color.
My hair color is fine. It's the same it was when I was a kid, Ed. God.
All right, Patty, thanks again. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please remember to subscribe to Big Blue View Radio on all of your favorite podcast applications. All right, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.